everyone. I'm Dr. Carmen Puliafito, and I'm happy to welcome to Retina Synthesis today Dr. Pearse Keane, who is consultant ophthalmologist at the Moorfields Eye Hospital and professor of medical artificial intelligence at University College London. Pearse, welcome to Retina Synthesis.
Hi, Carmen. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to come and talk to you.
You gave a fascinating presentation at Angiogenesis 2022 about the detection and quantification of geographic atrophy using deep learning and OCT. And I thought that our listeners would be intrigued to hear more about this process and artificial intelligence in general in medical retina. So, what did you present?
Oh, well, so I guess what I presented at Angiogenesis was some work that myself and a colleague of mine called Constantinos Velasquez at Moorfields, where we had developed in-house within Moorfields, we had developed an artificial intelligence system that essentially can look at OCT volume scans and can both detect and quantify geographic atrophy on those volume scans and generate some automated measurements of GA on those scans.
And what was your source material, basically?
Yeah, well, so I guess the background to this, just to say, is that, or if I can digress for a second, is that although I'm not a computer scientist and I'm not an engineer, I've somehow come to find myself leading a multidisciplinary clinical research group that aims to develop and apply AI in healthcare and using ophthalmology as an exemplar. And my first entrance into AI in ophthalmology was through collaboration between Moorfields and the artificial intelligence company DeepMind, whose parent company is Google. Now, that gave us a lot of expertise in how to aggregate and curate and prepare data sets for the development of AI systems. That was, of course, working with an industry partner. Now, more recently, what's been exciting is that we've been able to work and develop these systems in-house within Moorfields without requiring the ability to work with great collaborators such as Google or startups and so on. And so what happened was we essentially have a number of data scientists working for us within the Moorfields Reading Center. And these would be computer scientists and engineers who would sometimes be master's students or PhD students, or sometimes be sort of full-time staff members who are data scientists. And so we were approached by the pharmaceutical company Apellis, probably back in around 2019, 2020, something like that. And essentially, we agreed to work with them to develop this artificial intelligence system, and in particular, using this technique that we call deep learning. And to develop that system, they actually supplied us with the phase 2 clinical trial data from their study, the FILLY study, which is this study, as you're very well aware of, this complement inhibitor for treatment of geographic atrophy. And so they essentially gave us nearly 1,000 OCT volumes from patients with, from about 200 patients with geographic atrophy in this phase 2 trial. And we used that as the development set. So we used that to develop this deep learning system. And that was focused purely on segmentation of one OCT imaging vendor that was from Heidelberg Engineering. And essentially what we did was we got this data, and then within the reading center, we spent a lot of time labeling the data. And so we tried to prepare the data that was consistent with all the newest nomenclature for geographic atrophy, the CAM guidelines that include things like incomplete RPE and outer retinal atrophy and complete RPE and outer retinal atrophy. And so we trained a model to detect photoreceptor loss, RPE loss, hypertransmission within the choroid, and then to try and bring those things together to essentially delineate the geographic atrophy on the OCT scan. and then the output would be some sort of area in millimeters squared of the geographic atrophy, or some sort of location with respect to the fovea of the geographic atrophy. So we developed it on the Philly phase 2 data, and then I guess the nice thing about working at Moorfields and working in a reading center is that we were actually able to collect a data set of patients with geographic atrophy in Moorfields who had Heidelberg OCT scans done. And so we externally validated the model on that separate data set, and sort of proving that it works on a data set that's completely unrelated to the data set that it was trained on. And the great thing was that we got really, really good results. So what we were able to do is compare the performance of the AI system versus the consensus grading from a number of human experts within the reading center. And we found that there was almost exact overlap between what the model would delineate as GA and what the human experts would delineate as GA. And so what was very exciting then was that we were able to publish that paper in the Lancet Digital Health in September 2019. And of course, now we're thinking about what are the next steps with this work.
So where do you see artificial intelligence going in the management of geographic atrophy?
So I mean, the exciting thing is that we could be on the cusp of treatments, intravitreal therapies, or perhaps even oral therapies that are useful in patients with geographic atrophy. And so I would imagine that the initial use case is the monitoring of treatment response in some way using OCT compared to using a different modality like blue light autofluorescence, which may have some shortcomings in comparison to OCT. So I think that's probably the first thing. I think that there's also active research going on both by my collaborator Konstantinos Balaskas and other groups around the world, which is around trying to predict which are the patients that are most likely to progress very quickly using machine learning, and then perhaps target those patients in some way. And so that's, I think, an active research area. But really what I think in the longer term, for me, the promise of artificial intelligence is how can we bring world-leading expertise out of very specialized centers into the community and into more general use. And so, for example, in the United Kingdom, our optometrists around the country typically all now employ OCT scanning as part of their routine assessments. And so maybe there's a chance for us to begin to detect people at a much earlier stage using artificial intelligence and perhaps intervene earlier in some of those patients.
Well, I think geographic atrophy is an important target for AI. The pathology is complex. The patterns are difficult to monitor manually and even through a reading center. And once therapies become available, the number of data sets available will increase substantially, and the imperative of understanding what's going on will go up a lot too.
I still feel that we're still, as a community, somewhat clueless about geographic atrophy, I would say, in terms of the different phenotypes of GA. And of course, when you work in a reading center, you'll see the obvious things, such as patients with Stargardt's who've been labeled as geographic as AMD, for example, or other macular dystrophies. But actually, just in our practice in Moorfields, we're just seeing just unusual cases of I had a patient just last week who was in their early 60s, who had extensive macular pseudodrusen and night vision loss and had been labeled as dry AMD. But I start looking up the literature, and there's all these descriptions of this kind of phenotype And I just think it's fascinating, and I feel like we'll learn that there are some types of like garden variety geographic atrophy due to AMD that the treatments will work well on, but there'll be lots of other types that it may not work or will need different approaches.
I agree with you. The phenotypes are really very diverse, and we don't know if this is one disease or a number of subtypes of a disease.
Yeah.
So what else are you working on in terms of artificial intelligence and medical retina and diabetic retinopathy and wet macular degeneration?
Well, yeah, how long have you got? We've got a lot of cool stuff, but one of the things that we're interested in is taking, for example, this GA model that we've created, that, okay, so if we want to use that for direct clinical care, that's actually quite a long pathway to go through FDA approval. You probably need to work with commercial partners, and you need a lot of resources and time to make that something you can use in patients. And it's one thing to publish in a research paper, it's a very different thing to sort of deploy something at scale. But actually, one of the things I'm interested in is what can we do with these AI systems that might not require regulatory approval? How can we use it to enrich our research? How can we use it for other purposes? And so, as an example, we have built a cloud-based data pipeline at Moorfields, such that if a patient comes into Moorfields and they have, suppose they get diagnosed with AMD, they have an OCT, they have visual acuity measurements, they receive an injection, etc., that overnight, all of their electronic health record data and their OCT scans will be transferred to the cloud, to a Moorfields cloud, to a research database, such that we can use that to develop new AI models or do other scientific studies. And so one of the things that we're doing at the moment is we are just going to run the GA model on our entire Heidelberg OCT database on the whole, and we've got like about 3 million Heidelberg OCT, 3 million Heidelberg scans in total, and a significant percentage of those being OCTs. We're just going to run it, and then we're going to the labels that it generates will be added to the metadata within the database that we create. Mm-hmm. So we'll essentially enrich the quality of the data set that we have for other AI projects and other research projects. And then it will run on every new patient, every new Heidelberg OCT that comes in, we will do the same thing. Now, that's one thing, and we're doing that not just for GA, but we're going to do that for other models as well. So we've trained models that might do assessment of image quality on retinal photographs. And we essentially can just run them on every 10 million retinal photographs, so that we just know we have an automated measure of the quality of those retinal photographs that we can use for other purposes. And the algorithm that we developed between Moorfields and DeepMind, we're also going to do the same with that algorithm. So that's the first thing, enriching our data for research. But then the other thing that I'm super excited about is I think that we can use these AI models potentially to facilitate clinical trial recruitment, or the identification of patients for clinical trials. Mm-hmm. So I mean, I'm not sure how it is in all different US centers, but a lot of the time in the UK and Moorfields, it's pretty basic the way the trial recruitment works, right? Or the identification of patients for trial works. So it's like, okay, you say, there's some hot new drug, and Moorfields signs up as a trial site, and the investigators always say something like, oh, we've got loads of patients with this disease, but there'll be no problem recruiting for that trial. But then, of course, suddenly when you start the trial, you find actually it's harder than you imagine. And you might have this ad hoc approach where you tell all the ophthalmologists in the practice, oh, if a patient comes in with this that meets these criteria, then you should consider them for this trial. Or maybe you put laminated cards up in the clinic rooms, or maybe you send around emails or something like that. Or maybe you have a proactive approach where you have clinical trial recruitment staff who ahead of time look up billing codes, or look up what are the patients coming in next week for the trial, and see which of them might be eligible, and then kind of approach them. So it's pretty primitive. And so one of the things I'm thinking about is, suppose you have like a GA model, and you're running it on your pipeline. You could just potentially use it to identify every patient, whether current or previous, who the algorithm thinks has geographic atrophy on your scans. And you don't need FDA approval to that. You just run it, identify all you could take the 10% most likely cases that the algorithm is dead certain has GA, and then a human would then look at them and see, okay, is this person a good candidate, and so on and so forth. So we're interested in doing that. Now, the challenge then is how do you, if you're a pharmaceutical company and you want to do that at 100 different trial sites around the world, the major blocker to taking an AI system and then deploying it in that way for that purpose is going to be around data protection, patient privacy, and all of those things. And so what I mentioned in the angiogenesis is that we're working with a startup called Bitfound. It's a London-based startup founded by the guy who used to be the chief architect for Siri at Apple. And essentially they do privacy protecting technologies, in particular federated learning and federated deployment of AI systems. And so the idea is you could combine your GA model or your diabetic retinopathy model or whatever, your RVO model, with your privacy protecting technologies, such that you can go to a trial site in Nebraska, run it on the Heidelberg system there, and there's no leakage of patient data to the model, and there's no leakage of intellectual property from the model to the trial site. And then what happens then is within the site, to the clinical trial recruitment staff within the site, they would be surfaced some list of patients that might meet the trial criteria. And then perhaps the sponsor of the study might get some kind of like summary statement of, what is the potential number of cases that could potentially be recruited from that site, if of course the site wanted to disclose that sort of information. So yeah, that was kind of a little bit of a extended stream of thoughts, but those are some of our initial plans.
Well, it's exciting. I think geographic atrophy is a great point of access for artificial intelligence. So thank you very much for your time. We look forward to getting you back on retina synthesis in the future. And thank you for your participation.
It's my pleasure. I look forward to it.